All right, welcome back to another GTN Coaches Corner, where you can fire in your triathlon training and related questions using the hashtag GTN Coaches Corner, and we will do our very best to answer them for you.
Yeah, and we're here today to answer some of your questions. So let's get straight into it, starting with this one from DIY Papy, and he says, "Hi, how are you guys able to get a low heart rate at an easy pace? Mine is 145 to 50. When I'm pushing, it goes to 160 to 170. And sometimes when I'm running for like 40 minutes, it's straight on 160 because I can't get any lower, even if I only run for approximately 7 to 8 Ks. Wow. Heart rate is very individual. Not everyone's heart rate is the same. And when you say your heart rate is high, who are you comparing that to?
Yeah, I mean, you can do the old 220 minus your age, but it's a very rough ballpark figure.
Yeah, that's very much not accurate. I mean, it is a ballpark figure for what your max is going to be. You can also use heart rate reserve to work out your zones. That is taking that 220 minus age and then also subtracting your resting heart rate, which is very easy to measure because everyone can lie down and measure their resting heart rate, which gives you a more accurate measure because it takes into account if you have a really fast heart, you're going to have a fast resting heart rate too. So it does take into account a little bit. The best way to measure your maximal heart rate so that you can get your heart rate zones accurate, so that you can keep in your specific zones, is to actually measure it, which is painful.
Yeah.
Essentially, you have to get to your max heart rate. And the only way to do that is to work really, really hard. There are a few ways to do this, a few different protocols as they were. One is to literally just do an incremental 20 minutes where you just keep going faster and faster and faster until you can't go any faster and take your maximum heart rate. Another is to do essentially 2-minute efforts with 1 minute rest. So it's a VO2 max kind of thing where you do 2 minutes as hard as you can, 1 minute rest, 2 minutes as hard as you can, 1 minute rest, 2 minutes as hard as you can. And by the third one, you're probably going to get close to your maximum heart rate ever, obviously recording your heart rate the whole time. And then the final way is to actually just do an incremental exercise test where you try and increase your heart rate by about 10 beats per minute every 30 to 60 seconds until you can't increase it anymore. And that's going to be pretty close to your maximum. The trick with these tests is that obviously you can only hold maximum effort for a very short amount of time. So you need to get there fairly quickly, but you do need to build up to that. You can't just go as hard as you can from the beginning because your legs will blow up before you get to your maximum heart rate. You need to just build yourself up so that your heart rate's getting to its maximum, but you also need to not fatigue before you get there. Heart rate max tests are difficult.
And then from that, you can calculate your zones. And as we said at the start, everyone's an individual. You might have relatively high heart rate compared to your peers, your friends, people you train with. You might have really low. To be honest, you're saying you're running around 145 to 150 on an easy run. Mine isn't too dissimilar. I have a relatively high heart rate. 160 wouldn't also be that abnormal for me on sort of a longer run. Also, maybe something to just bear in mind if you are recording it through a wrist-based watch, an optical heart rate sensor on the wrist, they aren't always as accurate as on the chest.
Yeah. Essentially what we're saying is don't compare your heart rate to anyone else's. There's no such thing as a high heart rate or a low heart rate. It's your heart rate and your zones are relative to you alone. Some people have really fast heart rates, some people have really low heart rates, some of it's training, most of it's genetics. Don't stress about that as long as you're in your zone.
Right, next question from Harry Blake. Hey GTN, I've been running around 60 to 70k a week, training for a half marathon, and now I'm transitioning to a full. I would like to gradually increase my weekly volume to 100 kilometers and was wondering what a training week with that extra mileage would look like. I really appreciate your expertise and content.
Wow. I mean,
100k week.
100k week is big, and I might start this by saying I'm not sure it's entirely necessary. You can obviously, the more you run, the better you're going to perform in a long race like a marathon. But there's a few caveats to that, such as recovery. And if you've got a busy life and you're struggling to fit in that mileage, you may be costing yourself in recovery, and you may be better off doing less but more race-specific stuff than doing 100Ks just because it's a triple-figure week.
That extra mileage could literally be counterproductive. And you actually see a lot of pros staying away from the high mileage weeks because they know their limits and actually focus on the quality, even though they maybe have the time to do it. So.
Yeah, but to answer your question, if you are going from 60 to 70 up to 100 and you are looking at going, well, how do I fit all that in? There's a few things you're going to do. Obviously, you're going to increase your long run. Your long run, as you get closer to training for marathon distance, is going to increase, but it's not going to get to marathon distance. You're probably going to top out at around 32 Ks or 20 miles as your longest long run. You don't want to be running the full marathon distance.
I think this is a really interesting point, because I think up to a half marathon, you will probably regularly tick off 21.1K in your training. But beyond that, you don't need to be hitting marathon distance.
Not only do you not need to, you don't want to.
No.
The muscle damage that you're going to do for running further than that is actually not worth it for the training effect that you're going to have. So it's not really worth it. What you can start looking at doing to increase that beyond increasing your long run to up to 32 Ks is to start looking at double run days. Now, these are obviously hard work and take some balancing, but what you can do is an easy run in the morning and then a harder run or a tempo effort in the evening, so 6-8 Ks in the morning and another 10K or 12K effort run in the afternoon, or vice versa. You can do shorter intervals in the morning where you fresh and you can do the faster speed stuff and then back that up with a slower jog in the evening. And if you do double run days, you will see that mileage racking up really quickly and you start fitting it in. But like we said at the beginning, if you're struggling to fit it in, you may actually be better off not fitting it in. Do the marathon on shorter training.
Yeah, focus on that quality. Next question, and we've had a question similar to this before. Giles Harrod says he suffers with cramp in the arches of both feet when swimming in either pool or open water, and it happens fairly swiftly, say after 600 meters. Is breathing related, or is it something else? I'm going to go out here and say, I don't think it's breathing related. It probably is something else. And it could, I used to suffer from this a lot myself. And I put it down to, or figured out that it was an electrolyte imbalance. So I was depleted in salts, etc. And also, if I ran before I went swimming, that would quite often trigger the cramping. So I basically avoided that for a long period of time and got myself on top of it. And there's probably a conditioning element to it as well. I needed to strengthen up the arches of my ankles.
I think finding out whether it's an electrolyte balanced issue is really easy. Just get your electrolytes right. Take some salt tablets. Make sure you have got your electrolytes balanced before you swim. And if it doesn't happen again, you know what the problem was. However, if it's happening within the first 600 meters of the swim and you haven't, as Mark has done, run right before you swam, then it's probably not electrolyte balance. It's not something systemic like electrolytes. It's that actual muscle. And what you're probably going to find is that this is a nerve innervation or a antagonistic muscle thing. Basically, what you're doing is holding your arch of your foot in a awkward position, something you're not used to. And much like holding your muscle in any position that is not used to, you can't hold it there for very long. So what you're going to find is that muscle immediately starts fatiguing. As soon as it gets to a point where it just can't maintain it anymore, it's going to cramp. And that's what's happening in the arches of your feet. You're holding, because you're trying to point your toes, as you should when you swim in, to decrease your drag. You're contracting the arch of the foot. It's very small muscles, and if you contract them for too long, they're going to cramp. So that is a conditioning thing. And what you can do as far as that goes, you might think, well, how do I train the arches of my feet? Well, there's actually quite an easy way to train the arches of your feet. Put a towel down on the floor, preferably a slippery floor, and just curl your toes and pull that towel towards you. And you'll find very quickly that those arches underneath your feet start getting tired, and all those little muscles on the front of your shin and everything else start working quite hard, and before you know it, those muscles will be conditioned and you may get slightly further than 600 meters before those cramps occur. It is most likely, as Mark says, a conditioning thing.
Right, next question. And this is a great one because they've actually kind of answered the question for us and given us a multiple choice.
I like
So
multiple choice.
this comes from Yoshida Noburo. They said, is it okay to give hard efforts during an Ironman bike, say in zone 4 or 5, like going up a hill climb? So is it okay to just push on and really go into the red during an Ironman bike? And they said, A, yep. You will gain time over others and can recover during the descents in time for your run. Or B, no. During the race, you only have so many matches, and if you burn them during efforts on the bike, you will not get them back on the run, even if you feel like you recover on the descents.
Well, thanks for the multiple choice answers there. That does help, except that you left out, answer C, which is a bit of both. And it is a bit of both. You do have an unlimited number of matches that you can burn. You can only go into the red, as it were, so many times during an Ironman bike before you actually are going to run out of energy. You're going to be above that lactate threshold for a bit too long, build up the lactic acid, and it's going to start affecting your performance. How long that is probably accumulates depending on your fitness, but it is going to accumulate. If you go 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 15 minutes there, you're going to stop being able to do that later on in the race, and you're going to actually start slowing down. So you do have a certain number of matches to burn. However, having said that, A is also slightly true, because you can go into the red a few times during an Ironman bike ride, and you can recover on the downhill. You can eat and drink, and you can flush that lactic acid out if you can ease up if there's a longish downhill. So it's a bit of both. And essentially what an Ironman is all about is covering the distance as efficiently and as fast as possible. And if that means working a bit harder on the hills and then recovering a bit on the downhill, that might actually be your best bet. There are a few other factors to consider here, because
I was going to say, actually, I mean, I totally agree, but then if you have never trained in those zones, because a lot of people when they're training for an Ironman will literally sit into that zone 3 kind of effort and do a lot of their training around that. And if you're never doing those sort of zone 4 efforts, then it could be a massive shock to the system when you do that on race day. And you find that a lot when people kind of get excited in the race atmosphere and everyone racing around them, they start chasing after people and they really sort of ruin their race.
That is definitely one of the factors, is how well trained you are in those zones. And the other big factor is the break it gives you. By standing up and pushing up a hill, you might get your heart rate a bit higher, but that really can help your legs. If you've been sitting in aero position for a good hour or two while you were going along the flats and then a hill comes, getting out of that saddle, changing your position, even if it means your heart rate goes a bit high, can make a big difference on the other side of that hill when you go back into your aero position and you have to stay in that position for another hour or two. It may be well worth burning a match or two to get over that hill as fast as possible and really, really working a bit on that, because your legs are going to actually thank you for changing that position and pushing up that hill.
Yeah, nice one. Right, final question, and also from Yoshida. It said, are there different symptoms your body will give us during a race to know when you're low in electrolytes, and can you take salt tablets as opposed to being low in carbs, so we should take in food or gel? So basically they're trying to work out, are there symptoms that or signs that our body will give us when we're racing to know whether we're low in energy or low in salts?
Well, yeah, the symptoms are very different, and your symptoms of being low in energy are pretty obvious, and you probably know what they are. You're going to start feeling like you have low energy. You're going to start feeling like you have to slow down. You're going to feel like you just can't keep pushing, and that's almost certainly a blood sugar thing, and you're going to start struggling. Then you need to take in some sugars. Unfortunately, the symptoms of low electrolytes or electrolyte imbalance are a little bit more clouded until they're very, very real. When you cramp. Or when something goes really wrong and you just can't keep going, you can't take in any fluids, whatever it might be, then it's too late, essentially. Now, there is a thing to factor into this, and that is you can absolutely compensate for your electrolyte losses completely. Everything that you lose, you can take in. So if you're a heavy sweater, as Mark is, you can take in a fair amount of salt during a race and make sure that you stay on top of that. And there's almost no chance that you're going to get into a low electrolyte situation. Whereas if you're a medium sweater, I can take in maybe half of what Mark takes in and know that I will never get into a low electrolyte situation. And there are ways to actually test this. In fact, our nutrition partner, Precision Fuel and Hydration, does a sweat test where they measure your sweat rate or your sweat composition, and they can tell you how much salt you're losing. And it's actually done at rest, but it's very accurate for how much you lose during exercise. So as we said, Mark's a significantly higher sweater than me, almost double the amount of salt he loses, but he can just take that in. And the trick here is to decouple your salt from your energy, so that if you decide, I don't want another gel, or I don't want any more of my energy drink, you can still get that salt in, because the risk, of course, is if you just skip a couple gels because your stomach's feeling a bit weird, you don't get enough salts in, and then you start cramping, and then it's too late.
Yeah. And particularly for someone like me, I sweat a lot, and I've got a high salt concentration in that sweat. And it's very hard for me to find something that has that number of electrolytes in it. So I have to make sure that I have that in a separate bottle, and I take the carbs on in a different form. So
you take your salt grinder with you.
Yeah, pretty much. And also, you were saying about the sweat test, you can also go onto the Precision Fuel and Hydration website, and you can kind of do their little questionnaire, and you can get a pretty close ballpark figure as to what your sweat or salt concentration might be. And off the back of that, they can also give you a hydration and fueling plan. So really quite good.
And I think that's probably the big takeaway from this question is have a plan. You need to have a plan where you know how much salt and how much energy and how much electrolytes you're going to take in for a race so that you can stick to it and you can see where things are going wrong, and you will know that you haven't run out of energy. Or if you skipped a gel or two, you know this is an energy thing and not a salt thing. And if you've got a plan where you have enough salt, you know that it's not a salt thing. So have a race plan for your nutrition.
Yeah, cracking questions this week. So thanks for sending those in. Please do keep them coming in using that hashtag GTN Coaches Corner. You can leave them below this video or any other video. Thanks for watching. Hit that thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.